Welcome to MarsCast, the official podcast of Mid-America Reformed Seminary, where faculty and friends explore the depths of faith, unpack biblical truth, and engage with the critical issues of our time. I'm Jared Luchbord, Director of Marketing here at the seminary. Thank you for tuning in. In this episode, we wrap up our series on common grace with Dr. Andrew Compton, Reverend Steve Swets, and Dr. J. Mark Beach. They begin by revisiting the controversial 1924 debate that split the Christian Reformed Church and discuss Emeritus Professor at Compton Theological Seminary John Bolt's recent analysis that questions whether this division was truly necessary. They'll also explore how common grace applies to our everyday lives as Christians. How does this doctrine help us navigate cultural engagement, education, politics, and our work lives while maintaining our distinct Christian identity? So whether you're wrestling with how to live faithfully in but not of our increasingly secular world, or just curious about balancing theological principles with practical realities, you'll find plenty to reflect on in today's conversation.
Welcome back to MarsCast. I'm Andrew Compton, Professor of Old Testament here at Mid-America Reformed Seminary, joined again with Reverend Steve Swets from Redeemer United Reformed Church.
Glad to be here.
And with my colleague, Dr. Mark Beach, teaches dogmatics, well, chiefly dogmatics now. You're ministerial
still
studies.
Have some oar in the water with ministerial, but principally I'm in dogmatics currently. That's correct.
Yeah. Well, we are bringing this series on common grace to a close. What we wanted to cover in our last episode is just some further discussion of what took place in 1924, especially some of the more recent analyses that have been done of the debate and some of those contours, and then also try to end with just some broad kinds of application. In what way does affirming common grace benefit our day-to-day life? But we begin with some of this analysis. John Bolt of Calvin Seminary has spent a lot of time looking at this and has analyzed this in a variety of ways. What's he contributed to our understanding of common grace, but particularly to our understanding of how the debate played out in the Christian Reformed Church?
About 10 years ago or so, I'm not entirely sure when, in Calvin Theological Journal, John Bolt started a process of re-examining 1924, seeing it as somewhat regrettable how it all worked out. Bolt does not deny the doctrine of common grace, but was 1924 necessary to take place the way that it did? Did it need to lead to essentially a split in the church? And as church splits often take place, right, it becomes a polarizing effect. Yeah. The Christian Reformed Church goes further that way. Huxama and those who would go with him are going to go further that way. And as time has gone on now, just last year, in the Calvin, so that'd be 2024, the Calvin Theological Journal, he wrote a couple of articles dealing with the 3 points once again. And in a fascinating way, he wrote 3 points which he thinks the Protestant Reformed Church would agree with. That if these would have been the ones put forward, that it might not have led to a church split. It's an interesting idea, one which you will never know for sure, right?
Sure.
The actors are long dead by now.
Do you know if any Protestant Reformed churches, theological authors within that tradition, do you know if any of them have replied to Bolt on this question?
I'm not sure. So last year was the 100th anniversary for the Protestant Reformed churches. I know they had some lectures and some things being written, but I haven't seen any interaction with Bolt himself since in the last year. 10 years ago when that came out, there was some appreciation in the Standard Bearer for what Bolt had been writing, even just bring up again and saying maybe this did not go down as well as it could have.
Yes, Bolt did expose maybe some idiosyncrasies or some under-the-table kind of maneuvering at Synod that was not to advantage Reverend Huxama at all. I haven't reread those articles, so it's fairly vague. But he was basically calling that synod on the carpet and saying they didn't handle Reverend Huxama and colleagues as fairly as they should have, as I recollect.
Even from a church political polity perspective of deposing a minister in a consistory, it's Yeah. It's different than removing a congregation in the modern terms, different than removing a congregation from the Federation.
Yeah. Well, if anything, Bolt's articles have provoked or ought to provoke some further reflection, further scholarship. I think his articles would benefit from careful scholarship that would look at the kind of the tone of the debate, the sort of arguments that led up to the Synod, post-Synod. Some of those articles are in the Dutch language. Actually, quite a number of them are, so it requires some hard work. But I think that's the definitive analysis of that part of CRC history, and then it spills into the Protestant Reformed Church's history, I think still needs to be done. I think real scholarly work needs to be done in that area. So Bolt's work, I think, sets us up to ask some good questions.
Well, in Bolt, even I don't remember how many years ago it was that they published the Festschrift for James DeYoung, the former president of Calvin Assembly. I think he wrote a chapter in there. Am I right? And I thought with that he even was getting at something that at least many in the URC I think appreciate. How do the points of common grace and being required to assent to those, does that somehow is that somehow an extra confessional binding upon somebody's ministerial vows? And I think he was trying to explore that topic. And at least in the United Reformed Church, we've had a number of times where study reports have been brought, and there's been great concern. Are we adopting additional confessional standards now? Do we have the three forms of unity and the study committee report from such and such committee? Right.
Well, I think the kind of vitriol that surrounded the debate perhaps moved Synod, and it's not excusing the CRC Synod, moved them to overreact. At least, again, that's part of what we need to have scholarly work done on. But we do have this doctrine of common grace. It needs always to be attached to a Reformed confessional Orthodox theology. It's always going to, if you want, call it a dangerous doctrine when it's detached from classic Reformed confessional theology. Mm-hmm. But then what does the doctrine of common grace, what does it do for us? Why is it helpful? And perhaps as we ask that question, it might be harmful. What are its implications?
I think what you're getting at there, Mark, is key of balancing common grace and the antithesis together. Take, for instance, education. Mm-hmm. Both those who would be from the Protestant Reformed tradition, Christian Reformed tradition, these were Christian school defenders and promoters. And both would use the work of unbelievers and see that God can work even through, you're not better at mathematics because you've been baptized. Mm-hmm. You might understand the creation of mathematics and the foundation of an ordered God and nature better, but you're not going to come to better conclusions in algebra just because you've been baptized. And that understanding is impact of God's upholding his creation, giving to his image bearers, who, though the image has been broken, they still retain something of the glimmerings of natural man, and seeing the benefit of that. When you apply that to education, when you apply that to work, when you apply that to art, to all the different spheres of life, then you can worship God in a fuller sense, but also then develop the culture and work around you.
Yeah, even in education. I mean, there's any number, beyond just the classroom, there's any number of educational psychologists or people who have talked about educational pedagogy, who have come upon, and through analysis and through observation and through synthesis, have come upon what have been shown to be the most effective ways to teach algebra or to teach mathematics or the sequence through it. Again, as complete unbelievers, what accounts for that? Is it what accounts for them being able to serve fellow human beings, build up even Christians, in their ability to better understand God's world? What helps them do that, though they are sinners who deserve nothing good from God? What accounted for them receiving those good abilities and good gifts? Well, that's where the doctrine of common grace becomes a very helpful way of framing that.
Yeah, Calvin was very strong and raising those sort of questions and making those kinds of observations and defending and advocating the doctrine of common grace. What's somewhat curious here, we've recently, as North Americans, or more particularly U.S. Americans, coming out from under the presidency, the prior presidency to the now Trump presidency, we experienced through the COVID years and then subsequent to that, it felt like very much of a cultural shift, almost a revolution, where all kinds of Christian values and givens were kind of receding, and very odd values, non-values, a cultural enmity, excuse me, a cultural enmity was growing, and frankly, what it felt like for a Reformed Christian who believes in common grace is we're losing common grace. We need higher doses of it. Another curious question as we think of its implications is its relationship to special grace, because the leavening influence of godly people who are engaged culturally and who are loving their neighbors as themselves and trying to act in a manner that is for the benefit of others. Well, God uses that too. So common grace is never meant, it's common everywhere, in every land, country, place, people, tribe, tongue, nation. It's all the same everywhere. No, it's very particular in that sense, that there can be a big dose of common grace at a certain time, culture, place, people, that's absent in other lands, places, and peoples. So in that sense, it is grace. It's something God gives undeserved, and it can be prayed for. Lord, let your restraining and beneficial mercies come upon a people in general.
I think the point you make about the uniqueness of our situation at this time, living in the U.S. or anywhere in North America, it's a secular culture which is not Christian.
Right.
However, this is not an Islamic state.
Right.
If it was an Islamic state, we'd be in a very different category. So even if you're going to go to the March for Life in defense of the unborn, you might stand next to a Roman Catholic who you would not stand next to in hardly anything theologically. But when it comes down to that, a proper understanding of the doctrine of common grace, so yes, we can see the goodness in this view. We're actually going to argue from image-bearer theological framework. And then when you look at the other side, when you deny in the extreme any type of general grace of God, any type of common grace, and focus only on the antithesis, the danger with that, and it can be in the realm of education, in politics, in a number of different areas, is you close yourself in an isolation, and you view everything outside of you and your own little group as the enemy. And so there's no working together. There's no, especially culturally, it's a complete divide that there can't be that interaction.
It becomes pure antithesis.
Yeah, and think even how the transgender debate is raging right now. Are there any number of atheists? Are there any number of complete non-believers who recognize biological reality, who recognize that one's biological sex and their gender identity are intended to track with one another? We don't want to say, no, you have no grounds for that. You just don't. But we could say you don't really have a grounds for that if we wanted to press the antithesis. But the point is, we want to encourage them in that. We don't want them to be less committed to that. We want to say, no, God in His grace is though they do not deserve to be kept tethered to the creation order in their thinking and their acting and the way they choose to marry and raise children in a household with one man and one woman who are married, and God in His grace allows them to be tethered to that instead of allowing them to go shatter their home or shatter their community with a view like transgenderism that is cutting so hard against the grain of the cosmos.
Yeah, again, that common grace isn't altogether common.
Yeah,
it's a unique situation we're in where one of the few times where we will side with the extreme feminists against transgenderism
Right.
to keep women out of sports, for
Yeah.
instance. I'm like, it is a unique situation,
Yeah.
right? And it's part of it's connected to, you can call it common sense, a common order that God has created us with minds. For the Christian Reformed Church and the history of this discussion, we'd say this is just the fruit of common grace, of some type of common operation of the Holy Spirit, upholding something that God has given to us.
Yep.
No longer true knowledge, righteousness, and holiness, but some type of knowledge, some type of righteousness, and some type of holiness. Not salvifically, not in the way that Adam had it, but there still is, we are all worshiping creatures as image bearers of God. What redemption does in that is it's going to restore that which was broken, that we might put it to a proper end, not unto the building up of self and the glorification of man, but now for the glory of God.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, that atheist in a heterosexual marriage where faithfulness to vows are taking place doesn't deserve, or she doesn't deserve, to be in a place of safety, a place of wholeness that institution of marriage provides, and yet God allows him to be there. God does not give him what he deserves.
And in as much as such households raise up people that have a relatively wholesome integrity and reliability and an ordered life, who then go out vocationally and do the same, it benefits all whom they're in contact with. It benefits Christians who hire them as an attorney or go to them as a dentist or need them to be that specialist surgeon to save the life of their little infant child. Common grace manifests then that God gives blessings, gifts, talents to non-regenerate people who are quite superior in abilities in certain areas of life, in multiple areas of life, beyond Christians. So I would much rather have this atheistic, non-regenerate person who's this absolute brilliant surgeon performing this on my grandchild versus the guy in my church who is regenerate and loves Jesus.
Very pious.
But he's a little...
Never picked up a scalpel.
He's a little clumsy, thumbsy with the scalpel. That's just one of many examples like that.
And again, it's not that those who reject the doctrine of common grace as it has been proposed by the Christian Reformed Church's 3 points, or as we've been discussing it here, it's not as though they would deny that that they would rather have a good surgeon who's a non-Christian rather than a so-so surgeon who is. But what we're getting at is that there is a way of conceiving of these good gifts that they have against the backdrop of sin and accounting for it in robust theological ways by virtue of common grace that I don't think we can account for as fulsomely without it.
Well, then you have this conundrum, too, that you can hire, say you're a contractor, and you hire out various subcontractors. And most of the time you try, as a Christian brother, to hire out subcontractors who maybe likewise are running a business and they're trying to do so Christianly. But you find certain ones fairly unreliable. Perhaps they do sloppy work. They're not timely. But you find a non-believer who's very timely, with the utmost integrity. And what accounts for that? You're regenerate. You love Jesus. You're a new creation in Christ, but you don't actually perform your vocation as you ought to, belonging to him. Here's an unbeliever who doesn't have the benefits you have, and yet he goes about his vocation with more integrity and talent or skill or reliability. Well, how do you account for that?
And benefits from that.
How do you account for that?
Yeah.
Well, the doctrine of common grace comes in as an explanation. But, the whole context of common grace is part, since it's Kuyper, and by the way, if people don't know, his 3 volumes, they're thick, heavy volumes. They're very readable, but they're thick volumes, are now translated into English. He has complementary volumes that go with that called Pro Rege for the King, where it's a further application of how to live a Christian life in its broad scope, big dimensions. But that vision of the Christian where he can. In Islamic countries, Christians can't do what they can do in a secular North America. But Kuyper's talking about, look, unbelief presses its claims everywhere. Let's press our Christian regenerate life into all the cracks and crevices of life. Why leave our faith at the door anywhere? Mm-hmm. Unbelief doesn't, so we shouldn't. But as you engage in a wider world, then you're rubbing shoulders with people in society, in vocational pursuits, in the arts and sports, in which they outshine you often, or too often, in their basic behaviors and dispositions. Accounted for why? How? Common grace.
I think for me, the practical application of this is, I think, this is just a theological discussion, nuance with terms. As a Christian, as a pastor, as a parent, probably where the rubber hits the road the clearest is the cultural engagement aspect of it. Mm. We try to teach our children these things of how to live in this world, but not of the world. We don't flee from the world. We are engaged in it, connected to it, and still living in light of who we are in Jesus Christ. That our witness, our Christian evangelism, isn't simply, my neighbor sees me leave for church every week, but that you will engage in a loving, in a God-honoring way, to be faithful in the places that he calls us. And I think an emphasis upon this balance of understanding of God's treatment of his creation and us as image bearers and our calling there really is probably the most fruitful I see it take place.
That brings us to the end of our series on common grace. We hope these discussions have given you a deeper understanding of this important doctrine and its practical implications for Christian living in today's world. Much thanks to Andrew Compton, Steve Swets, and Mark Beach for their thoughtful contributions throughout this series. Looking ahead, I'm excited to welcome Dr. Cornelis Venema for our next batch of episodes where we'll look into the doctrine of assurance. Dr. Venema is going to guide us through a comprehensive exploration, beginning with the foundation of assurance in Scripture and our Reformed confessions. We'll then examine historical perspectives from Reformed churches across North America and see how this doctrine has been understood and applied in different contexts. And finally, we'll bring it home by discussing what assurance looks like in the Christian life today, how believers can live with confidence in God's promises while navigating the complexities of faith. Make sure you share this content with others who might be interested, and be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite shows. I'm Jared Luchabor. This has been an episode of MarsCast. See you next time.